Phase 4 of the MCU has had a lot of discussion if it's lost its magic, if the great Kevin Feige has finally let the MCU Roman Empire of cinema collapse. This is because Phase 4 of the MCU is more focused on quantity over quality. Everyone feels it, even if you're enjoying the MCU right now. It can feel so exhausting watching a Marvel TV show, especially when we know that show isn't going to lead directly into the next installment. Phase 4 of the MCU is the largest of the phases with 6 films, 7 shows, and more than 50 hours of content to watch. That means the entire runtime of Phase 4 is equal to the first 3 phases of the MCU. Fans are making fun of the CGI in Phase 4 right now because all of the content is being pushed out at a rapid pace that the artists aren't able to keep up with. Why would Marvel change their formula if it was already working so well for their content? Let's talk about it. I would be surprised to hear anybody's favorite movie came out of Marvel's Phase 4. Now, there's some diamonds in the rough. Shang-Chi and WandaVision definitely stand out among some of these other additions to the Phase 4 lineup. But what makes those additions stand out so much compared to the rest? Shang-Chi was an origin story that really fleshed out a character that a lot of people didn't even know of, even for comic book readers. I've read my share of comic books and I didn't even know who Shang-Chi was or what his story was. That's where I believe this movie shined. No one really knew what to expect from this movie. All we knew going in was that the Mandarin was in it and that it was finally going to retcon some things that happened in Iron Man 3 that a few people weren't very happy about. It's like Kevin Feige knew he had to right that wrong from Iron Man 3 to keep his street cred. Not only does Shang-Chi have amazing visual effects, great action, and a heartfelt story, it's one of the best MCU origin movies we've seen in a long time. The humor really worked for me, and it was really well received by fans and critics alike, but they didn't dilute the action or the story by too much humor. WandaVision was the first MCU show, even though Falcon and the Winter Soldier was actually slated to come out first. The style and storytelling in the show was really fun to watch, and it got us excited to watch weekly and see what was happening, trying to figure out what this mystery was and why Wanda was taking over this town. Everyone thought it was Mephisto. It was a really big deal, and it really got the community just excited about what was coming in the MCU. Wanda is such an interesting character and hasn't had a lot of time to really shine on her own, and this show gave her the perfect opportunity to explain how powerful she actually was and to get a little deeper on the trauma and everything she's been through post-Endgame. You really feel for Wanda in this show, even though you have to question if she's going about it the right way. Each episode of the show updating to a different style based on the popular shows of that decade was a very unique way to keep us entertained and to keep the pacing of the show fresh and new every single week. This is still my favorite MCU Disney Plus show, and I think it set the bar very high for other installments to come down the road, which may be the issue. But introducing the Disney Plus shows is actually where the MCU fatigue started to skyrocket. It already felt like we had to go see every new MCU movie every opening weekend to keep up with the talk and to not be spoiled. But now you have to watch entire TV show series to understand what's going on in the MCU. Or do you? The reason Phase 4 is so difficult for everyone to enjoy is that we don't feel the overarching story happening in between these shows and movies just yet. We've been conditioned that every single movie and every single show of the MCU leads to a bigger payoff down the road. The momentum of each installment in the phase always leads to a big payoff at the end of the phase in either an Avengers movie or a world-ending or changing event. We haven't gotten to see that payoff just yet in Phase 4, and with so much overlapping content not directly tying into each other, it's hard to see where Phase 4 is going, and it just feels aimless for the fans. Now you might say, Kang the Conqueror is coming, Cole, just be patient. Yes, I agree, and I think Loki did a really good job of establishing Kang and just how big of a villain that he will be leading up down the road. The issue is we don't see Kang's plans or his shenanigans throughout any of the other MCU shows or movies just yet. We should have enough faith in Marvel and Kevin to know that this will eventually all pay off, but it's possible it might not pay off until Phase 5 or even Phase 6. So why is that an issue now? As we talked about in the beginning of the video, there's more content than ever happening in Phase 4. In previous phases, we've had characters like Tony and Steve have independent story arcs in their own movies that cross over and overlap in Avengers films and other sequels that really just drive home the fact that these are very fleshed out characters, and we always knew when we were going to see characters again, and that always gave us a sense of direction because we knew we were always aiming towards something like Avengers Endgame. The only character that we're really seeing that with in Phase 4 is Thor. And I understand this is a rebuilding phase. We're trying to introduce a lot of new characters and a lot of new stuff in the MCU after a post-Endgame world, but we aren't seeing that same aim and determination that we saw in the beginning. With Sam Wilson taking over the mantle of Captain America, we haven't seen him yet in the MCU again. We haven't seen Shang-Chi and what happens after his movie or where he's going to come up again. We don't know when the Eternals are going to come back into play, other than their own sequels. And while I love Moon Knight very much, that show has already been forgotten about because we don't know where that leads into or when we're going to see Moon Knight again. The only real payoff we've gotten was seeing Wanda and WandaVision show up again in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and that happened after multiple shows and movies were already released, giving us a little too much time, almost making us forget about Wanda and her situation. And I think the biggest gripe that a lot of people have with Wanda and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is that her character continued from WandaVision in a direction that I don't think the show was actually intending for her to go down. But with the certain pacing that they have right now in the MCU, it seemed like Wanda's story was very rushed in Doctor Strange, and we really didn't get a satisfying payoff about why her character was really doing that. Multiverse of Madness arguably took Wanda's character arc from WandaVision and altered it in a way in Multiverse of Madness that didn't seem on par, and they tried to blame the Darkhold for that very reason, but it just felt very rushed, and I think that's just the huge symptom of Phase 4 is everything seems rushed, and it doesn't seem like anything really makes sense right now. Phase 4 of the MCU definitely feels like a rebuilding phase, but how can they fix the fatigue that we're feeling? One, TV shows should lead directly into movie projects. If you're going to have Disney Plus shows alongside movies, you're going to have to incentivize people to watch those Disney Plus shows directly before a movie comes out. WandaVision should have came out, and then Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness should have come out directly afterwards, immediately paying off what was happening in that character arc. But instead, Moon Knight comes out before the Multiverse of Madness, and it had no implications towards that movie whatsoever. We have no idea when Moon Knight is going to show back up in the MCU based on how the show ends. There was just certain storytelling in the first 3 phases of the MCU that all felt linear. It all felt like we were building to one specific thing. Even if the timeline wasn't specifically in the exact same order, it was a narrative that specifically pushed the story forward in the present. For example, Captain Marvel gets teased at the end of Avengers Infinity War, and even though her solo movie takes place in the 90s, you explain her character, and that immediately pays off in Avengers Endgame, where you see that she's a powerhouse that's able to take on Thanos basically solo if she wants to. So we're introduced to Captain Marvel in her own solo movie, and then that immediately gets paid off in Avengers Endgame, where all the rest of the MCU characters get to meet Carol for the first time. Black Panther and Spider-Man are both introduced in Captain America Civil War, and then directly after that we get Spider-Man Homecoming and the Black Panther movie to expand on the story arcs that were given to us in Captain America Civil War. Fleshing out the characters in their own movies after being introduced in the MCU, I think was a brilliant move for characters like Spider-Man who have been done multiple times, but even characters like Black Panther, where maybe you wouldn't have been as inclined to watch Black Panther when that first came out, but because you saw what he did in Civil War, how badass he was and how interesting his character was, it made that movie that much more important to go see, and it really interested people that may not have known Black Panther at the time. I think a really good way that Phase 4 could have really shown the implications of Kang is after the Loki TV show, when we're going through the Multiverse of Madness, we could have seen multiple different realities of Kang and what that could have meant. You could have set up Kang as a really huge threat for the MCU right then and there, and only Doctor Strange would have known how important that was, further solidifying the fact that Doctor Strange is going to be the key to almost always saving the Earth, just like he was in Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Another issue I have with Multiverse of Madness is the after credits scene. The first 3 phases of the MCU did a really good job of always hyping up the next movie in the MCU with the after credits scene, and not necessarily vague or funny after credit scenes. We see at the very end of Multiverse of Madness that Doctor Strange has a third eye that opens up, and it has a really good cliffhanger there to really make you think, wow, Doctor Strange could be totally different now. What are the ramifications of this? And it was a good character cliffhanger for us to want to know what's going to happen with Doctor Strange. Is he different now? And how does this affect the MCU going forward? But the after credit scene immediately shows that No, Doctor Strange actually knows how to use his third eye, and he's just ready to jump through a portal with Clea into the next Dark Dimension adventure, which we have no idea when that's going to come out. I think that after credit scene would have been incredible if we knew when that was going to pay off, but we have no idea when we're going to see Doctor Strange again, and we don't know what the ramifications of that third eye and what the Darkhold have taken on Doctor Strange, and we didn't really have time to let that digest. When you show something as big as that happened to a character like Doctor Strange at the end of this movie, and then you immediately show that it's okay in the after credit scene, that everything's going to be fine, it just didn't give us time to digest really what we had just seen on screen, and I thought it felt just a little cheap. We were left a little open-ended and unsatisfied with that. Remember in Age of Ultron when we got that amazing after credit scene of Cap and Falcon talking about Bucky and how the Accords were never going to let them escape with Bucky and that Tony probably wouldn't be able to help them based on what was happening? It got us so hyped for Civil War. We knew exactly what was going to be going down, and we knew that Iron Man was going to be involved in Civil War just based on comic implications. But even if you don't know the comics, that after credit scene built up just enough hype and momentum that when we knew we were going to get that movie, it was going to be amazing. And going back to our new additions to the Phase 4 lineup, we have Shang-Chi, Eternals, and Moon Knight, and new characters that we have no idea when we're going to see again. The only show in Phase 4 that I think follows this is actually Ms. Marvel, which I actually really enjoyed. This addition to Phase 4 was so refreshing, and I could really just feel the characters being fleshed out a little bit more. It seems like they put a little more time and effort into fleshing out Kamala's story and what that would mean for the MCU moving forward. And if you haven't seen Ms. Marvel yet, there's going to be a little bit of spoilers here. We've got the moment we've all been waiting for since Disney bought Fox. We get the mention of mutants in the MCU. It's one line that doesn't drastically change the show, but immediately sprinkles in things that we know to come. The scene that actually sets up what I'm talking about is the after credit scene in Ms. Marvel. What's really good about this after credit scene is when Kamala switches places with Carol, we know that that's going to immediately affect what happens in the Marvel's movie. Through this after credit scene, we not only know when we're going to see Captain Marvel again, but we also know when we're going to see Monica Rambeau's Photon character and when we're going to see Ms. Marvel again, where all the other shows have no idea where those characters are going to pop up again. I think this also brings a lot of hype to the Ms. Marvel character, because if you did really like that show and you did really like that character, now you know when that's going to happen again. You know when you're going to see that next character iteration. For me specifically, I love the Moon Knight character, but I have no idea when I'm going to see Moon Knight again. I think this is the reason that Phase 4 really feels all over the place. Phase 4 has had a very interesting filming schedule when compared to the earlier phases. Everything is being filmed together simultaneously in bulk over a 7-month period. With most of these schedules and productions overlapping each other over a 7-month time frame, the VFX work and the CGI isn't able to be completed, the stories are rushed, and everything feels just messy. And also because of the Disney Plus shows being on Disney Plus, they don't have to follow a normal network strategy of keeping your attention through commercial ad breaks and through a weekly installment. They like to consider their Disney Plus shows as 6-hour plus movies that really get drawn out. And of course they're trying to keep Disney Plus subscribers as long as they can, which is obviously why they had the Obi-Wan Kenobi show overlap with Ms. Marvel, but sometimes the shows take a hit for that with a very, very bland middle section of usually episodes 3 or 4 not really hitting the mark that it should, and keeping that momentum going. I feel like it would be better for the Disney Plus shows to release in a bulk method, or at least drop more than one episode at a time. Marvel could also consider hiring TV writers to keep network pacing and attention over 6+ hours of content, rather than movie writers that are used to a very succinct 3-act story. Having 6+ hour epics seems really cool if you're able to binge that all at once. If you're only getting pieces of the story at a weekly time frame, it makes it very fatiguing to try to finish the show if you can't get into it, especially with newer characters that people aren't familiar with, like Moon Knight and Ms. Marvel. We didn't understand why Wanda was doing what she was doing in Westview, and each episode had its own theme and its own 3-act structure that led to each different episode. So it felt refreshing, and we were excited to watch and talk about that show because no episode felt like a filler episode compared to episodes in Moon Knight, Loki, and Captain America, and even Ms. Marvel had a few episodes that drew the story out just a little too much. The hype about speculating from these characters was also a really huge thing about Phase 1, 2, and 3 that we aren't able to do in Phase 4 because we don't get to see what those implications are leading towards like we did in the Infinity Saga. It doesn't seem like we're heading to one specific destination. And I actually enjoy that the MCU changes their characters from their comics counterparts. I think that makes the MCU very fresh, and it makes it where they can do whatever they want to do and change things that maybe wouldn't work so well in live action. But I also think that Marvel expects you to know a lot about these characters before you go in. I love Gore the God Butcher, and I understand his story so much better than someone who hasn't read Thor God of Thunder. But from the perspective of someone that casually enjoys the MCU, I don't think they actually understand the greatness that is Gore the God Butcher and how important his story is to a world like this. We only get to see Gore killed one god at the very beginning of the movie, and for comics fans, you know that the context of that is he's going to kill multiple gods, and they mention it in the movie that he's killed gods, but we never see that happen. So for someone that doesn't know who Gore the God Butcher is, and all they see is one god get killed, his character could seem very one-dimensional and not very interesting compared to someone that knows the backstory of Gore the God Butcher, such as myself and other fellow comic book fans, and we're able to piece together those things because we know what the character is. For a casual fan, Gore the God Butcher could seem lame, and he never should be lame. You can name the amount of gods he killed on your hand throughout the film, which should always, always, always be an issue. They are all discussed rather than shown in Omnipotent City. Zeus and Eternity are also introduced in Thor Love and Thunder, yet they only get one-sentence explanations on what they are and how important they are, whereas a comic reader knows that Zeus and Eternity are humongous implications to the world and what's going on. For someone that's a casual MCU fan, I don't think they understood quite how big of a deal it was that Eternity was on screen. I think this all boils down to they just need to slow down the production schedule and have a little extra time to finish their VFX work and flesh out these rich stories and characters that they have from multiple decades of comics. They know they have a loyal fan base that's going to go watch every single one of these films and TV shows, so why not put a little extra time in between these and make sure that they're actually good content coming out for the MCU that is able to be picked up by casual fans and loved by comic book fans all together. The MCU wasn't great because of the years of comics that came before it. What made the MCU so great was they always delivered on what they promised us. Great movies, great storytelling, great action sequences, and great visual effects. And ultimately, that each movie is building a greater story of world building that will lead to a giant payoff at the end. I'd love to know your thoughts on all this in the comments down below. I haven't been fully satisfied with Phase 4 just yet, but I have faith that they can pivot and get this in the right direction where we can all understand why it's going to pay off in the end. If I know anything, it's that Kevin Feige is going to make sure that the X-Men and the Fantastic Four are very well done because it is going to be the next bread and butter of the MCU after this new rebuilding phase. I can't wait to talk about everything X-Men and Fantastic Four and the MCU moving forward, so make sure you subscribe to join the Dork Side today so you never miss any of our future discussions, and you're going to be entered into our next gen console giveaway, which will be announced at 1,000 subscribers. If you want to see where we rank the other MCU movies and just how much we love the other phases of the MCU, go ahead and click right here. We give a very in-depth analysis, and it was really fun video to make. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.